Okay, we are live on another edition of the Edlow podcast. I am here with Mark Hunter Brooks. Hello, Mark. How are you?
Hey, how are you, Josh?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking, and thanks for coming on the podcast. You're another interesting one for me because I was taking a look at your profile, and you very interesting. You're the author of a book called Earth's Hidden Reality. You have had several spiritual experiences
hmm
over 2 decades, and you talk about kind of the intersection, if that's a better way to put it, about the intersection between the spiritual world, the physical world, and kind of wavelengths, right? And how that kind of can explain it.
Absolutely. Boy, it'll take me a while, but if you're willing to listen,
I
this will be
am.
fun. Okay.
I am
Uh,
willing to listen because the thing that's interesting, real quick, is I've found it very interesting how there seems to be kind of two camps. There's the camp of everything is material,
right,
in the science,
right.
and then there's faithful people, and it seems almost like if you're religious, you just don't want to believe in science at all. And then if you're a
I love
scientist,
it.
you don't want to believe in religion at all.
I love it.
So if you've got a way to interconnect it, I want to hear it.
Well, that's exactly what I have,
Okay.
and I want to use the metaphysical to link them together.
Okay. What do
So,
you mean by metaphysical? What does that mean?
what people consider mediumship, healing, channeling, all this other stuff, all these things that they call them psychic abilities or paranormal abilities. I call them spiritual abilities, and
Okay.
I can show how they all link with science and with religion. And
Interesting.
what I'm trying to get to is a common worldview, and that's what I think is the holy grail for me, if you want to use a religious term.
Mm-hmm.
But let me step back a little bit. I started having spiritual experiences about 20 years ago, and happened quite by accident. I was playing around, and I say in the book, don't play around, always have a mentor if you're interested in doing this stuff. And I
Mm-hmm.
even titled the chapter of in the book, fools go where angels fear to tread.
Hmm.
So don't mess around on your own with this stuff. Find somebody who's been there, done that, to kind of help give you a positive or a pleasant experience.
And what
But
you
anyway,
mean by sorry, let me stop you right there. What you mean by that is playing around with this metaphysical stuff.
yes.
Okay, like because in my head as you're talking, I'm going like, okay, so are we talking about like Ouija boards and seances? What
Well,
are you
let, let,
talking about?
let me go. I'll take a couple steps back and work up to it, but I'm going to get
Okay,
there.
okay.
So, when I started having these experiences over 20 years, right now, I can see things, I can hear things, and I can feel things. I've seen entities, in my room at night, when it's dark, lots of them.
Hmm.
I've seen entities in my front room during the day, moving around. They're mostly a lot of them look, and this is my book. I put one of them on the cover of the book so you can see what it looks like. Um,
That's
but
what you're saying is an entity.
an entity, that's one, but there's all different kinds of shapes and sizes and different components of it. So anyway, that's where I am now, and I've written 4 books, and Earth's Hidden Reality is the 4th book. But what I tried to do in my first 3 books, and the first one came out in 2016, was I have a strong religious background.
Hmm.
Grew up Southern Baptist, went to a Church of Christ for a number of years too.
Hmm.
Very steeped in the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament.
Hmm.
So what I wanted to do in my first books was to address skeptics and atheists who say, "Show me proof and show me evidence," when they ask people of faith who don't know the scientific method, who don't know how to collect evidence that a scientist
Hmm.
would look for or whatever. I wanted to try and do something that was objective, that I could give to scientists to say, "All right, here's your proof and here's your evidence for what people believe in faith, and that
Hmm.
this stuff is really real."
Hmm.
So that's where I started, and this 4th book is just kind of expanded on it,
Hmm.
because what I've come to is, in trying to understand all this stuff, is that physics is different from what people generally believe. People
Hmm.
can say it's either quantum mechanics based or it's particle based, but I say it's fully wave based. Is that
Hmm.
we're just packets or groups of waves here in our environment. All the objects around us are all waves,
Hmm.
and I'm trying to build the case for it in this book. But one
Hmm.
of the unique things that I tried to do in this book too is to address the scientific community. I did recommendations for experiments to falsify my claims, and that's
Hmm.
something key in the scientific method. Is if you're going to propose some wild, crazy theory, give me a way to prove that it's not true.
Hmm.
And so I've given recommendations for experiments and also a number of observations
Hmm.
to falsify the data,
Has
falsify
it
the claim.
has anybody taken you up on it yet?
Not yet. I'm
Ah,
looking for it. I'm looking for it.
nice.
So, and I'll even tell you a little bit about it. It's the key experiment, and I think this is important to do this experiment and to be diligent about, and encouraging people to do it. The experiment is to do neutron decay in outer space.
Hmm.
And there's already been two NASA probes that have done neutron decay experiments in outer space. So it's already been done. It isn't like it's some pie in the sky thing. But the whole idea is that if neutrons are particles, they'll decay at the same rate in outer space as they will on Earth.
Hmm.
But if neutrons are wave based, then it could be that the proximity between the neutrons affects the amount of time it takes for them to decay. And if there's
Hmm.
a significant difference in that decay, it could indicate that reality is wave based as opposed to particle based.
Interesting. Can I
And
stop you? Can I stop you right there real quick? Okay.
yeah, sure.
You're talking to somebody here who went to law school specifically to avoid science and math. So so when you're saying I think I understand what particles are, can you explain what you mean by particle based versus wavelength based?
Um, Particles are going to be easy because it's just protons, electrons, and neutrons. It's the little
Okay.
spheres that were
Mm-hmm.
proposed 100 years ago. It's more nuanced now,
Mm-hmm.
because in quantum mechanics they say that electrons are really clouds of energy. But you can find a particle in there, or it's a particle moving so fast in this cloud of energy. But and there's something called the Heisenberg uncertainty principle that says, if a electron's in motion, you won't be able to tell what its position is, but if the velocity is zero, you can tell its position, you can find it. But I
Mm-hmm.
was saying, if it's a wave, the wave's going to be moving, you won't be able to see any kind of particle. But if the wave is stationary, like a standing wave, like when you shake a rope and it just the waves stay in the same place, that's what
Mm-hmm.
I say is a particle. Is it's waves that are staying in the same place and not moving when you shake them, when they vibrate.
Okay.
And that's what I'm trying to say is what we have around us. And you may not know about the Schumann resonance. Have you ever heard of that?
I haven't.
It's a set of frequencies. The Schumann resonance, the base resonance is 7.83 hertz. It's very low. But
Mm-hmm.
this vibration envelopes the entire planet from the surface of the Earth to the ionosphere. And what keeps these vibrations going is lightning flashes all around the world, and all these different thunderstorms and stuff like that. The act of lightning, keeps this vibration 7.83 hertz going. And there's something called harmonics. Have you ever heard of wave harmonics? That if you have
No.
something that will vibrate at 10 hertz, then you may have a harmonic at 20 hertz, 30 hertz, 40 hertz, and 50 hertz. So
Mm-hmm.
multiples of that base frequency, you could
Mm-hmm.
say, are harmonics. And there's actually 4 or 5 harmonics to the Schumann resonance.
Hmm.
So it goes like 7, 13, 21, 27, 32, something like that. And I know I'm off, so my apologies to people who know these things exactly, because I try to be accurate every time I can.
Sure.
But what I'm leading up to is to say that in a fully wave based reality, you can think of a wave based reality as like you having an FM radio. And
Hmm.
when you turn the dial on an FM radio, you change from station to station to station. But what you're really doing is you're changing frequency from one frequency to another, and that gives you another station. Well, in a fully wave-based reality, you can change from one reality to another by changing the frequency.
So,
So
so when you say reality, are you talking something like going from, say, like our reality to, say, like a heaven or a spirit world? Or are you talking about something like the multiverse?
I'm getting there.
Ah,
Not
okay. Sorry,
not
I'm
not
jumping ahead. I'm
not
jumping
yet,
ahead.
not yet.
Okay.
But I
Okay.
was going to say that you can have multiple realities, and I would say a way you could explain that is these are at the different harmonic frequencies for the Schumann resonance,
Mm,
but you can have different dimensions as well.
mm,
And just as you can have multiple realities, multiple dimensions, it's just like having AM radio, FM radio, Wi-Fi, mobile communications all existing in the same space. They can coexist because they're at different frequencies. And it's the same thing with realities and the way they would vibrate. This is the claim that I'm making in the book.
so I'm probably jumping ahead again, but it sounds
Yeah,
like what
let's
you're
do it.
saying. You sounds like what you're saying is that there could be multiple realities going on right where we are right now, and it's just a
Correct.
matter of changing a frequency to a different frequency in the wavelengths.
Correct.
To So when you say wave-based reality, if you were to switch this metaphysical dial, we
Yes.
would be in a completely different reality than we're in now.
Absolutely. That's
Whoa,
exactly it.
whoa, okay.
So
So,
let me say it's my thoughts and ideas. I give you ways to falsify the claims. I don't claim to have the answer, but I wanted to give you as many observations as I could in the book to say this explains scientific anomalies, this explains miracles in the Bible, this explains the paranormal, is by saying that reality is wave based. And let me also take another step back and talk about worldviews, because you
mhm,
talked earlier about a scientific worldview, you talked about a religious worldview. They knock heads with each other. They
mhm,
don't agree, and both groups, I've seen organizations from both sides use critical thinking to say this is why we're right, is because we're using critical thinking and can give you logical arguments why we're right and they're wrong. But the reason they're right and the others are wrong on both sides is because they have different worldviews. And it's those
mhm,
different worldviews that are supporting the logical ideas and thoughts and stuff that they're each coming up with. So
mhm,
why can't they get together? And this is where I come back to wave-based reality, is that what I'm talking about is a change that's so fundamental that it's below the worldview level. It's
mhm,
it's actually a fundamental support for the scientific paradigm that gives us our worldview of reality itself. And that's why people haven't been able to find it over hundreds of years, is because they've made an assumption that reality is one way when I say it's not. But
mhm,
because it's so fundamental, is when you make that shift, if it's true, and you make that shift, it'll be so wide ranging, the changes in what people believe and how things are constructed and what's right and what's wrong, what's up and what's down, that such a
mhm.
fundamental change. But in my mind, it explains all these things. I said scientific anomalies, miracles in the Bible, and the paranormal.
Yeah. So how does that? Tell me how those. And I'm sure that's a loaded question, but how do those fit into this? Like, wave. How does wave-based reality explain a miracle that came in the Bible? Like, let's use the Red Sea parting.
Well, let me use the feeding of the 5,000.
Okay, that works too.
Is if you look at a loaf of bread and a dried fish as a bundle of waves, it's
Mhm,
easy to replicate that waveform, kind of like the replicator on Star Trek,
mm,
in the Starship Enterprise. Is you're just creating new waveforms to replicate what that is,
mm,
and that's one way you can explain it. But I have in one of the appendices in my book, I have 100 different instances of miracles in the Bible, and I tried to explain them using parapsychology terms, that they
mhm.
were either telepathy or remote viewing, or let me see if I can quote it directly here. Um, spirit communications, which is communications within and between dimensions, um, channeling, remote perception, energy healing, the manipulation of physical objects is psychokinesis, um, body levitation. I could explain that with wave based physics.
Hmm.
You know, a lot of these things could. So I'm trying to say that miracles in the Bible are really can be explained as parapsychological activities, or I call them spiritual abilities.
How could you use a wave-based model, a fully wave-based reality, to explain the resurrection of Jesus Christ?
let, let me go back a little bit on that. Is
Okay.
um, there's multiple different non-physical dimensions,
Okay.
and there, let me say, there's a number of books that are about 100 years old, especially by the Theosophical Society,
Okay.
where they have done a lot of just nuts and bolts blocking and tackling work on the non-physical, from the non-physical dimensions, describing them, the beings that are in them, the characteristics of it, to talking about there's four primary non-physical bodies. There's an etheric body, an astral body, a mental body, and a causal body. And um, they can also, well, they also explain death, but my book explains it a little bit more, is to say that death is not the end of your life. It's just the movement of your eternal consciousness from a denser dimension. When I talk about multiple dimensions in the same space,
Mm-hmm.
they have different densities, and that's how you can have different dimensions existing. You're moving your consciousness from a denser dimension to a less dense dimension, and you have to drop your denser body in order to move to that less denser dimension. And at the end of, let me get back to this book again, because I quoted pages in books on where they talked about it. Um, it was in a theosophical books by Arthur Powell. He talked about the physical death and the etheric double on page 70, excuse me, the death of the etheric body in the etheric double on page 71. Arthur Powell talked about the death of the astral body in his book, The Astral Body, on pages 204 to 206. And Arthur Powell talked about the death of the mental body in his book, The Mental Body, on page 261 and 262. And another fellow named Charles Leadbeater talked about the process of birth, life, and death on pages 78 and 79 in his book, The Devachanic Plane, which is another name for the mental plane.
Hmm.
So they've talked about it. And let me walk back a little bit too. I'm going to come back to the resurrection of Jesus.
Okay.
But walking back a little bit more, I want to say that for a conscious being, an eternal conscious being, to move into the physical, they have to descend through a number of intermediate dimensions.
Hmm.
You know, when they start out up in the causal, they move to the mental, to the astral, to the etheric, to the physical, and each one is denser than the previous one. And I use a little thought experiment to explain what I'm trying to communicate in terms of the concept. And I say, imagine you have a cube, a square, a line, and a point floating in space in front of you. And you can turn that cube to where it looks like a square, and you can turn that square sideways to where it looks like a line, and you can point the line down to where it looks like a point. But a point can't look like a line can't look like a square, and a square can't look like a cube.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
So a being can go from a higher level being can go to a lower dimension, but a lower level being can't go to a higher dimension.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? And this is just, like I said, I'm just giving you concepts, ideas, prototypes, straw man, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
things for discussion.
So, so you're saying essentially, let me make sure I understand, because I don't know if I do. Let's see. So what you're saying is your consciousness starts out in this causal plane, moves down to the mental plane, moves down to these other planes,
Yes.
but it's not like they can go back. because once they've
The
gone down, they can't come back. So
the
it's kind
the
of like a journey that's going one way.
the no the higher level being can go back up,
Okay.
but if you had a lower level being, they can't. So it's another way to look at it too is think of a movie as you can stop a movie to a single frame and it'll look like a photograph,
Sure.
but a photograph can't look like a movie
Right.
because
Well,
it's the lower dimension.
so if a higher being can come down, but a lower being can't go up, is death not making the lower being go back up?
What I'm wanting to say is, and the
Okay.
point I'm getting to is that there's people who say that religious scripture or Bible scripture says that we're a temporary being, but when we die we go to eternal life.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm saying is that you can look at this thought experiment, and it says that you can't go from a lower dimension to a higher dimension if you're a lower dimension being. You have to be a higher dimensional being coming down into that lower dimension in order to go back up.
Well, doesn't that mean, because that's the thing, I think that you and I might be saying a little bit of the same thing, because if
Yeah.
you're an eternal being isn't just into infinity, it's infinity to infinity, right? So you've always been.
In terms of
Is
time. Yeah.
right, that's what I'm saying, eternal. So when you say you go into eternal life, it's not like you die and then you go into eternal life. Eternal life has been you've always been. This is just
Correct.
a this is just a temporary space in a forever before and a forever after.
Correct.
Okay, so we're on the same page.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
cool. All
So
right.
and then in each of these dimensions too, there's fields of energy, and
Mm,
they call them elemental essence. And this
mhm.
is what the Theosophical Society guys have done, through their research 100 years ago.
Okay.
But if you're a higher level being, in order for you to go down more than one level, like if you're a cube to look like a square, for you to look like a line and a point, you have to wrap yourself in the energy of the dimension below you in order to drop one more dimension, and then wrap those two bodies in the dimensional energy of the lower dimension to go down to a fourth dimension. Does that make
Hmm.
sense? So,
Yeah,
so
so as you
you,
drop down dimensions, you inhabit more of what takes to become that dimension before you can go down to the next one.
correct, correct.
Okay.
And what I propose that you can say that what the manifestation of that is in the physical is the human aura.
Hmm.
Is what they say is this one, two, or three layers around your body. Is that I say is that's that elemental essence energy layer that's allowing your higher level consciousness, your eternal consciousness, to come down into the physical. Is it's
Hmm.
wrapped in those layers, and that's what you see around people's bodies. If people can see an aura,
Hmm.
that's what that is.
Interesting.
That's my proposal, my hypothesis. I
Sure.
want to say it's not my answer, but all the things I propose in here, which I spent a long time working on the books, and a lot of thought in it. It's more than half a decade. Is
Hmm.
they're all internally consistent,
Hmm.
which I like, and
So so now going back to the resurrection of Jesus, are you saying essentially that he was a higher being that came down, died, went back up kind of the different planes, and then came back down again?
no,
Ah,
I'll
okay.
be a little bit more nuanced with it.
Okay. Okay.
Is that Jesus was a higher level being? Let's say he exists in that, and it's really Christ, not Jesus. I want to say
Hmm.
Jesus is the physical manifestation or the physical body of the Christ. But
Okay.
I say the Christ came down from a very high level
Okay.
and inhabited this physical body, but in order to do that he had to take on that astral layer and that mental layer of energy. So, what happened before his crucifixion was the transfiguration, where
Mm-hmm.
where you see the bright light or whatever. And
Hmm.
and I
Hmm.
say that event was where he shed his astral and mental body so he could go directly back to the causal. Because if you die and you have that astral or mental body, you can't go any higher than the astral or any higher than the mental. And that's one of the things that
Do
that
you
they say
know?
in these books.
Do you know? I can't remember in the timeline how long the Mount of Transfiguration was before the crucifixion. Was
Two
it like
about 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
2 weeks? And then, there's also the story of the Garden of Gethsemane when he's there alone and an angel came strengthening him. Do you think that
Yes.
that may have been also a part of shedding some of this stuff too?
And, or just giving him energetic
Mm,
strength, and that would be a wave based transmission of energy, a wave based
interesting.
transmission to strengthen him.
This is sounding very alien-like. I just want you to know.
I hear you. I hear you. I know.
Because I've had
That,
this
that,
argument. I've had this argument with people before where I go, you do realize that you think God is an alien, right? And they go, no, that's not what I think. And I go, well, you think heaven is like up there, right? If it's up there, aren't they? It'd be an alien. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry, that was a random thought.
so
So,
so also too, when you have a higher level body,
huh.
you have a lot more control over the physical
Okay.
environment in terms of making changes and things.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Just like people with a higher level vibration normally have stronger healing abilities. And I would say if Jesus got his causal body back or his high level body back before he died, he would be able to go in and heal that physical body and jump back into it to, you know, burial and resurrection. So he could come back into that. But if you had your astral body, you don't have anywhere near the strength of, wait a minute, you don't have anywhere near the strength of the healing energy to be able to do stuff like that. But at his level, he would be able to do that. And I'm basing that on these old century old books that I've read, uh,
Yeah.
and then talking to people. I know people who heal, and
Mm.
I've actually done some healing on myself over the number of years, and I know it gets
What
stronger the more you work with it.
what kind of
But
healing have you done?
I started with just doing shaking my hands and reciting a mantra, and
Mm.
I that's the only name I give to it. But it's just
Mm.
completely healed. It's just you're saying you're already healed, and that's one thing they say with healing or manifestation is that you want to say it's already done.
But
So
I mean,
I was
what did you heal?
myself
No, but I mean of what?
pains, pains in
Oh,
my abdominal pains and stuff like that.
got it.
So started out with that. Then I learned Reiki level 1 and 2, and was doing energy stuff. And then a few years ago, I was able to start doing vibrational healing with my cerebellum, the back of my brain. Is that you can use that to point vibrational energy to parts of your body and heal parts of your body. And
You can actually direct your brain to fix things.
I can direct the energy within my body, and that was one of the things that I did in 2003. That kind of got me, tied up with all these spirits and stuff.
So
As
where
I learned how to sensitize my body to the movement of energy within it.
Real quick before you go on, I want to ask what you said Reiki. What is I don't know what Reiki is. What is that?
Reiki is, I believe it started in Japan, but it's an energy healing modality.
Oh,
Is that
okay.
you can push energy out of the palm chakras in your hands,
Uh,
and you can also pull the energy in too. That's not Reiki though. That's other modalities. And a lot of people who do healing, they do multiple different techniques to heal people. It just depends on what
mhm.
that individual needs. So they
So
don't do just one type of healing or another.
so
And
so so real quick, when you talk about healing, just curious, like, has there been an ailment of some sort of diagnosis that you feel that you have healed yourself of? I mean, like, I understand you have like, I have a pain in. It sounds like you have a pain in your hand, and you're able to heal it by just directing energy to it. But has there
Mhm.
ever been like a thing like I have carpal tunnel syndrome, or I had this, and you've been able to direct enough energy to recover
we'll,
from something like
we'll
that?
we'll be going down a rabbit hole if you want me to go there.
Well, okay.
But but
Let's hear.
I can say one of the things that I've been able to do was feel spirits for 20 years, and I
Mm,
feel that to a certain extent, spirits are responsible for different uh, ailments or um, chronic pains or problems that you have. Ultimately, though, it's all a manifestation of ourselves. It's just like you may hear people say that Jesus is, or not Jesus, but God is, an all encompassing energy that's experiencing itself, in the universe. It's carved up itself into all these little pieces on all these different planets and all these different worlds, and it's experiencing itself. But that's a universal energy that's experiencing itself in different levels in different ways.
Hmm.
Um, but what I was going to say is that when people say that they feel like spirits have caused things for them
Hmm.
or to
Hmm.
them or whatever, ultimately they'll find that it's actually manifestations of themselves. It's yourself. It's your own consciousness interacting with itself that's causing these stresses or illnesses or things in your body. But at one level of your spiritual development or consciousness development, you can say that there's spirit beings that are affecting your body or the way your muscles move, or inflammation in your body, is that you can have that as well. And I talked about, um, let's see, suggestive healing, energetic healing, vibrational healing, and then there's healing with higher level beings. Higher level beings have a much stronger ability to heal, and we call on Jesus, we call on God to heal us and do things. Is really a number of beings in those higher level uh, dimensions. They have similar abilities, not to the extent that Jesus or God would have it, but they would have similar abilities to heal as well, because the ability to manipulate waves is much stronger in those higher dimensions where there's less density.
There's like I
I
feel
know
like
I'm
we could
playing with you.
I feel like we could talk for like 12 hours and not get through all of this stuff. So let me ask you just a
Well,
couple of things because I want to draw back to a couple of things you just said.
can okay,
So like because I as an attorney I deal a lot with medicine, particularly when it comes to like injuries in the spine and things of that
right,
nature.
right,
So like for example, I personally like I've been in a car accident. I got rear-ended and I ended up with a disc protrusion in my lower back. So the disc in between my L5 and S1 vertebrae, some of the gelatinous stuff in the middle has torn. There's been a tear in the disc, and
hmm
it's come out and
hmm
it's impinging on a nerve root, which is causing pain down my leg. So
right.
scientifically, we know that that gelatinous stuff is causing that pain. So when you say that you think spirits are causing pain, are you talking about things like, for example, like there's some people who have, myofascial pain, which is really just kind of a diagnosis of we don't know why you're having pain, right? Or like, are you saying things like anxiety,
Or
that kind of pain? Or are you talking about even the pain that I'm feeling because I have felt in the past because of a disc protrusion that causes pain in my lower back?
I um I would say to varying degrees, yes, but and there's ways to uh, heal the pain as well. And what healers do is they heal the etheric body of pain or whatever's a problem or an issue, and that change to your etheric body propagates to your physical body over the course of about 6 or 8 hours.
Hmm.
And that's the big difference between doctors and healers. Is doctors are working on your physical body and trying to heal your physical body, but healers are actually working on the etheric body and healing that and letting those changes propagate to your physical. And that's the
So
big difference between them.
no, that's interesting because, like, for example, there's
Cool.
everybody has like arthritic changes in their spine,
hmm
right? And we
hmm
have certain situations all the time where someone has arthritic changes in their spine, but they're not having any pain. And then they get in a car accident and suddenly those arthritic changes are causing them pain. So you could have, I mean, if you, I don't know how old you are, but we could take 100 people with your birthday, MRI their
Right.
spines and see the degenerative changes. It
Right.
doesn't mean you're
Right.
all going to have pain. So
Right.
I could, and nobody can
Well,
explain why.
well, let me go to something else that I've done more work with, and it's
Okay.
body tremors. Like
Okay.
you'll have people that have shaking hands or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that I found that it's to me for me it's been caused by spirits that will get inside like my forearm muscle or my biceps, and they'll interact or interrupt the transmission of the neural signals or nervous
Sure.
system signals, and that causes that shaking. But if I can pull them out, and that's what I've been able to do, is it goes away immediately.
So how do you know they're spirits?
Because I can feel them. I mean, I've felt them for 20 years.
So, and I'm asking the questions because I'm sure
Well,
a
well,
scientist would ask, how do you know
and
that's not just like a nerve feeling? You know what I mean? Like shooting through your spine or through from your nerve endings.
I'll say it's subjective. I can't give you an objective answer. I can just give you observations so you can create a hypothesis and do an experiment.
Okay. Okay.
So, but subjectively, I that's my answer is that it's spiritual entities that get in your muscles and interrupt the nervous system communication that causes these tremors in your body. And if you can eliminate them, the tremors go away. Similarly, too, I and let's say it's just a theory.
Hmm.
I don't want to say that it is or whatever, but you could think of cancer and cancer spreading throughout your body. I've felt spirits that would light on my coccyx at night, the very lower body
Hmm.
bone on my spine.
Yeah, the
That's
tailbone.
that's where your kundalini is. But your spine has just got a ton of energy going through it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a massive amount of energy, and you don't want to mess with it when you're playing around with metaphysical stuff or whatever. But I have felt spirits attach themselves to that coccyx, and they would shoot energy up to different parts of my body where I would, maybe like feel a lymph node pain or stuff in different parts of my body to send energy to those entities. And I've always thought that cancer could be a spirit that would go in and destroy cells in tissue, and your body's going to rebuild those cells. But what that spirit's going to do is it's going to drop little spiritual entities in it that'll control the consciousness or control the movement or the direction of those cells once they regrow. But since it's not part of the body, it needs to have energy fed to it, and that's where I felt that uh, energy flow coming from my coccyx going to different parts of my body, and that was a
So,
number of years ago. So, but
well,
I'm
well,
I've never told anybody that, so I don't want to get my head hung for it. I'm just giving you an observation.
no, it's interesting, and I want to work that out with you because you it's you think that this would be when you're saying spirits, like are you hypothesizing that
So
like we're talking about evil spirits that are coming
no,
in
no,
and
no,
doing these
no.
things? No?
Spirits that are just living off of your energy, and there's no evil of it. A lot of it is caused by um, you know your emotions. Your emotions over time can create entities.
Huh.
um, yeah, and this is something I want to write about in my next book, is to talk more about. I've talked about the physics in my fourth book. There's a
Hmm.
theosophical book called Occult Chemistry that talks about the chemistry of wave-based physics. And I want to talk more going up the ladder, the scientific ladder. I want to talk more about biology and about psychology in my fifth book. So
Are you
I'm
do
getting
you
into that.
do you, when you seem to know a lot about like you seem to know a lot about about physics. Have you studied this on your own? Are you did you go to college for something like that, or how did you come to know all? I mean, I do. You're using terms that I have never heard, so I'm like curious.
It,
Did you
it's
just
it's
self study this?
multiple years of self-study, and
Okay.
I went through 25 courses of these online or DVD professor courses and stuff like that. I don't want to mention a name on the podcast,
Okay.
but I've been through a number of those. I've read or I've purchased probably over 2,000 books, maybe closer to 3,000 books over the 20 years. when my
Wow.
fourth book came out, I gave away my metaphysical book collection to a
Mhm.
fella here in North Carolina. I gave him 1,000 books, and
Wow.
I have two shelf bookcases left, and I'm
Well.
overpacking that. So I just that's my vice is I love books.
Yeah.
Uh,
When you say metaphysical though, are you talking about like are these books that are like peer-reviewed scholarly books on physics and how they work, or are these kind of like are these off the mainstream? A lot of them?
Both.
Mm.
I'm trying to get religious books, monastic
Hmm.
books, Sufi books, Kabbalah books, on that, and on the mystical side of religion, religious books to talk about Scripture, because I want to be able to provide a, spiritual interpretation of Scripture, and that's another thing I'm working on. Is
Mm.
and just as an aside, is Jesus's parables. A
Hmm.
lot of people say, it talks about Christian virtues,
Hmm.
but when Jesus, in chapter 13 of Matthew, Jesus gave explanations for two of his parables, and he was talking about it from a literal standpoint, but also from a spiritual standpoint. He wasn't talking about it from an allegorical standpoint or a metaphorical standpoint. He was talking about it from a spiritual standpoint. And so
Hmm.
one of the papers that I've done is looking at all of Jesus's parables from a spiritual interpretation. And when you look at it from that standpoint, you see that he talked about two things. He talked about the process of spiritual development and the fruits of that process.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so it isn't like, oh, you need to help the poor, you need to, everyone's your neighbor and all like that. That's a misinterpretation of what those parables are, because his intention all along was is that he was trying to give literal interpretations to spiritual things he was trying to communicate.
Interesting.
And yeah, so that's one of the things, one of the ebooks that I want to do. I've got it
Interesting.
done. I'm just trying to go back into it and do some more work with it, and also talk about the spiritual passages in the Bible, and giving a spiritual interpretation to it as well. Because I think a lot of preachers in many denominations are hesitant to talk about the spiritual if they haven't had a personal spiritual experience to back it up. A
Hmm.
lot of them are hesitant to talk about some of these spiritual passages, like, our bodies will be changed in a flash, or
Hmm.
the kingdom of heaven is within you, you know,
Hmm.
or the unseen is real and the seen is not,
Hmm.
and we're just looking in a mirror in this present life. All these different verses in scriptures. I want to give it a spiritual interpretation based on the things that I've read and thought about and done and written, uh, to give people a whole different perspective of what the Bible uh, says from a spiritual standpoint. And I really believe in the words that are being communicated through it. I believe they're valid. I just want to say that people are afraid to, or I don't know how to say it. People who are leaders in different denominations are afraid to talk about the spiritual. They weren't
Hmm.
50 years ago, I don't think, but I think they're
Hmm.
more afraid to now. But also, too, I think just like you talk differently to someone about a subject depending on their age, whether they're a child, a teenager, or another adult. You'll approach the topic differently depending on what they can understand or comprehend. I think the Bible was written for people who comprehended things a certain way 2,000 years ago. But I think one of the issues that people have today is that it's not speaking to the complexity or the sophistication of their consciousness, their level of consciousness today.
Hmm.
And it's almost like you need a more detailed explanation of some of these things that are covered in the Bible, as is to say, yes, it was written for a teenager, but now that you're an adult, let's give you the more adult, the meat instead of the milk, uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
talking about it. So
Interesting.
that's kind of where I'm going. But I want to try and link all these things together,
Yeah.
science and religion and the paranormal, and it's all the same thing. And I was even going to say too that all the different sects or things that you hear about in the paranormal when you talk about witchcraft or voodoo or all these other things, they're not separate powers or abilities. It's all physics. It's all the same stuff. They're just
Mm,
using different names or giving it different names or using different examples, but it's all the same stuff. And I use two examples when I talk to people about this. I say that um, intercessory prayer, when you pray for someone for healing or whatever, you use the same techniques for intercessory prayer, which is focus and intention and concentration and visualization. Those are the same things you use in spell casting.
mm,
It's just you have a different intention. Instead of an intention to benefit yourself or to benefit someone who's asked you to help, you set an intention to benefit others for the highest and greatest good for everyone concerned. That's the big difference. It's the same physics, but
mm,
it's the difference of intention. And the other thing too is like when you do remote healing, you're using, I believe, you're using quantum entanglement to create a link between the healer and the person being healed. But for remote healing, that's the same technique you use as inflicting pain on someone remotely with a voodoo doll.
mm,
It's the same stuff. But I'm trying to say it's all physics, and it's not, these things that are good or bad or evil or angelic or whatever. It's physics. That's the
mm.
whole thrust of the book.
So when you mentioned you've had several spiritual experiences, it sounds like you you had a background in Southern Baptist
Yes.
denominations,
Yes.
but it sounds like you've kind of graduated now to kind of more, kind of spiritualistic kind of ideas. Is
I,
that?
I, I want to say I have spiritualistic ideas, but I want to remain grounded in my religious upbringing and training.
Uh-huh.
But I want to explain that religious training and upbringing and understanding from a spiritual perspective.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
and
But
and I go ahead.
don't, I mean, if you're Southern, I mean, I served a mission for my church in Indiana, and there wasn't a
Right.
lot of Southern Baptists, but there were a lot of Baptists, and there were a lot of apostolic Pentecostals and different,
Right.
and they all believe Jesus is the only way. But if you're more of a
Yes.
spiritualistic and you're using all these different methods, it doesn't sound like you currently still believe that.
Well, I've changed my point of view to be a purely spiritual viewpoint.
Okay.
And I think that was one of the benefits of me spending this half decade, writing and researching and thinking about my book. It was the same thing of when Muhammad spent a year and a half in a cave, when Jesus spent 40 days in the desert. Jesus wasn't necessarily just tempted by the devil then. I think it was a time that you need to spend by yourself to change your worldview. And that's what I think of when I think of those times alone. Because if I was talking about things that I had experienced or ideas or concepts I was thinking about for the book and told that to my family or to my friends, they would shut me down. They would
Hmm.
say,
Hmm.
you're crazy. But that's because they're working with this particle based materialistic worldview, and from that perspective, I am.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
by me having the time to develop this wave based worldview and a purely spiritual based worldview, the things that I talk about are not crazy. So,
Hmm.
but
Do
until
you?
you prove it, and that's why I was saying you need to do this neutron decay experiment. Uh, I have no foot to stand on. All I want to do with this experiment, the one that I'm proposing, is to shift the knee a little bit to say, well, it could be wave based reality, because right now it's purely on, it's particle based or quantum mechanics based. But
So
I need once you do that, that opens the door for, all explanations of all the paranormal, explanations of all the Bible miracles, all these other things. But you need to have that shift to do it. And without having that shift done first, uh, scientists or atheists or skeptics, they'll just tear up people who are trying to explain things like what I was talking about, healing or spirits and stuff. They'll tear that up because the underlying worldview is different. Or I need the underlying worldview of a fully wave based reality in order to support the other things that I would talk about. So I really say people need to do this first experiment before we talk about anything else.
so Do you you mentioned earlier, you said that, you, as you use these things, you started having spiritual experiences over 20
Yes.
years ago, and as you use these things, they've been kind of increased. You're able to use them more. Do you believe that
Right.
you have some sort of psychic or paranormal abilities?
A very low level. I mean,
Okay.
I've talked to people. I've talked to a number of people who have had much stronger or better abilities than I have, but it all rolls back to the purity of heart and mind,
Mm-hmm.
and the purer heart you have, and the more compassionate, more loving heart you have.
Mm-hmm.
That is also what develops that energy, that ability, to that degree too. And
And you mentioned earlier. Sorry to interrupt you. I just you
that's
meant
okay.
as I was thinking. As you mentioned earlier, you said you see entities. Does that
Yes.
include like entities like spirits, like ghosts, things like that, or are we talking about those little things that you were talking about in the picture?
Um, I've seen a number of, and you'll have to go to Charles Leadbeater's book on the astral plane,
Okay.
and he talks about elementals. He said there's like 2,400 different kinds of elemental beings in the
Hmm.
astral plane, and I've seen a number of those,
Hmm.
um, and like dozens, not hundreds or thousands, but dozens. I've seen a couple spiritual entities down at the foot of my bed. One night I saw a dog running around beside my bed that looked like he had probably just died and he was playing. I There was one night a number of years ago where it was almost like someone who was having an out of body experience. They couldn't control themselves and they kind of smashed into my body, and I just felt like this silly putty just come all over me,
Hmm.
and I could sense this um, fear and anxiety, in them. And I was trying to calm them down and say, it's okay, you're not going to be hurt or whatever. But that entity just kind of gradually pulled itself off of me and went off, you know, in space or whatever. There was another time, and this was like one of the first times where I felt an entity like it was going into my head, and I grabbed it before it did, and I held it real tight in my hand, and it shook my hand like it was a gyroscope trying to get out. And I had my
Hmm.
hand sitting up above my bed for like 30 seconds, and it was shaking my hand like I was holding a gyroscope. And then I let it go, and I could sense that it was saying, "Did this really happen? What just happened here? What was this?"
Yeah. Are you when these things happen? Are you in your bed? Or are you where are you at?
They were mostly in my bed, but I've been able to see more things during the daytime.
Was the
And I
one
think it's
with the what was the one where you said it felt like someone was having an out of body experience? Did that happen in your room or was that somewhere else?
That happened in my bedroom when I was in another part of town. That was probably about 15, 17 years ago. I was in a
Interesting.
housing development down there.
Wow. Wow. Now, that's did you ever find out who that
No,
person was?
no,
Interesting.
never.
Did it say anything to you or
I just sensed the fear, and I've
uh,
I've just now started to be able to hear things,
mhm,
words and communications. Um, but mostly it's you get it, and I tell people, if you want to develop or understand or experience the spiritual, the biggest thing you need to do is to quiet your mind. A lot of people have these really chatty minds, um, and there's Bible scriptures that say, God's in the silence, and I'm paraphrasing, but
mhm,
it's because you need to have a quiet mind in order to discern uh, thoughts or communications that aren't your own, and
mhm.
or maybe video images. I've had videos play in my head, that would go away when I opened my eyes, or that would stay playing while I had my eyes open. But I could feel the vibrations of the spiritual entity playing it back in my visual center.
Do you ever know like why or what it is that you're seeing? Like is there some reason why you're seeing these things?
In some cases, yes, and I want to say they're trying to communicate something to me, but I'm not that well versed in the things that I see to understand what they're trying to say. But there was one time I was telling a spirit, and I was going through this phase saying, they're just figments of my imagination. It's all part of me or whatever. And I told this one, or I was saying to this one spirit telepathically, is I said, "You're just a figment of my imagination." And then the next thing I knew, it had attached itself on the back of my head, and it was playing like something that looked like Steamboat Willie, one of these 1930s or 40s cartoons. It was all black and white and stick figures.
Wow. This
Yeah,
happened, was this a time when you were in your bed or were you somewhere else?
I was lying in my bed. Most of them have been in my bed until just the last couple years.
So
But I feel like
that's just really interesting because I got to tell you, like, that for me, if something like that was happened, did you ever feel like you were just like, is something wrong? You know what I mean? Like, do you think to yourself, am
never,
I, you never once were like, maybe
never,
I should get this checked out? You know what I mean? Like, I think if
never.
I just started seeing things, like, if I just think, I don't know, maybe I don't have enough
It
faith, but I just think
it was
if an entity ran into me and I felt fear, I'd be like, something's going on. You
so
know?
so a lot of it in the first part, and I think a lot of people are like this. They've had spiritual experiences, but they'll be damned to tell anybody about them. They
Yeah,
don't want to be known as being crazy or nuts. I say this partly because I've written books about it, but also too I want to be vulnerable to people so that they can feel comfortable telling me stories that they
sure,
haven't told anybody else. So that's one of the reasons
sure.
why I'm sharing all these things.
Well, I think it's
But
interesting because here's the reason why I bring this up. Like, I'm one of those. Like, I feel personally
mhm,
like I have had spiritual experiences, not like that, but I've had my own spiritual experiences. And I
mhm,
think anybody who is particularly religious
yes,
probably has had some sort of experience that cannot be explained by the physical world, right?
yes,
Which I think is very frustrating for people who are all material. They get really frustrated because they're like, how can you possibly think that? There's no evidence to support
correct,
that. And you just say,
correct,
well, yeah, but this is how I feel, right? I don't
correct.
I don't share a lot of those things, not necessarily because I don't want anyone to think I'm crazy, but just because I think they're kind of sacred. They were pretty important to me at the times when they happened. Came in traumatic times and things that I
Right.
share some of them sometimes. But they're more feelings, or they're like, even I hear some that are dreams, but it's very rare that you hear somebody who will say, I'm laying in my bed and like a person having an out of body experience like slammed into me. It's just so rare to hear.
I hear
And
you.
so uh but like it's interesting because as I'm thinking this through, I think to myself, if this had happened to me, I would think I'm going crazy,
Right.
right? But at the same time, I've had spiritual experiences not as dramatic as that,
Hmm.
and I would never deny that I had them.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's just so interesting to me that this you mentioned real quick, sorry, I'm bouncing around, I know, but like you mentioned you don't
Yeah.
want to play with these things. Was this something that you wanted to develop?
It just happened, and these spiritual and my spiritual experiences, I want to say, are daily, day in and day out, every day now. And initially they were very frequent, but I say they were persistent spiritual experiences. It wasn't one of these once and done kind of things. It
Mhm.
was something that started and became more and more and more common
Mhm.
as I got more into it.
Mhm.
The reason why I say have a mentor is because of a couple things that had happened to me while I was doing my own experimentation. I started out with a mentor, but I kind of went past what they knew, and what I was doing was a little bit more than what they wanted to be involved with or whatever. But I was trying to manipulate the energy in my body, and there was one thing I did to my brain, and I won't do this because I don't want other people to play with it. But I moved the energy in my brain around the wrong way, or it was a way that I shouldn't have done. And I did that for a couple weeks, and after a couple weeks, I started stuttering, and it took about a year and a half to get rid of it.
Really?
Yeah. So that
Wow.
that was the big thing for me is don't do this stuff. And a lot of people are. anxious to say I want to have an out of body experience, or I want to do ayahuasca or psychedelics or whatever, uh, is make sure you have somebody who's been there, done that, to kind of guide you through these things, because you don't want to do things and that would scare you, frighten you. Number one, you want someone who's there to tell you what you're feeling and what you're experiencing, and that it's okay. But then you
Mhm.
don't want to do something that's crazy that people would say, "Oh, I wouldn't do that if I was you."
Yeah.
You want someone, you
Right.
yeah, so you want someone who's going to keep you on the straight path and not go off in the gutter somewhere.
So I was going to actually ask you, because a lot of what you're saying and what you're sounding like, it sounds like I know some people that have gone and dabbled in psychedelics and different things, like you mentioned ayahuasca.
Yeah.
Is that a part of this a spiritual transformation you've made? Are you
No.
using those?
No.
No, not at
No.
all.
No.
Have you ever thought about it?
Don't need to, because I've got
Really?
more than enough to convince me.
Yeah, but I mean, if you
You know what I
did
mean?
that, don't you? I mean, you've
Mm,
gotten to where you are. If you did it, couldn't you unlock something even?
no,
No.
I've done more with what I've experienced than what they would provide. And then also too, if you let's take ayahuasca or psilocybin, for instance,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
DMT, you have these experiences. You can never get beyond it being a subjective experience.
Hmm.
You can never say definitively it was something spiritual, as opposed to it was a hallucination or something that happened in my brain.
Hmm.
The only way that I found to be able to have something that's more objective than subjective is to have group experiences. And I think I want to get the name right. Thomas Campbell. He wrote a book called My Big Toe, and it was my big theory of everything.
Hmm.
And on page 85, he recounted an event that he had with Robert Monroe, who was an early out of body explorer. And Robert Monroe wanted to get his out of body lab set up, and he you know, asked him and another engineer friend to help with the setup. And in exchange, he taught them some out of body techniques.
Hmm.
And one day, they both went out of body to doing the same exact thing. And Robert Monroe recorded everything they said. He asked them questions at the same time. What are they doing? What are they experiencing? Where are they? What do you see? What do you feel? And they did this for like an hour, hour and a half. And then when it was over, Monroe said, "Come back to the control room." And they got out of their pods and came back and listened to the recordings, and they were within seconds of each other having the same experience.
Wow.
And that's when Tom Campbell, it was page 85 of his book, and I quoted it in an earlier book of mine. That's why I remember the page number. But he said he spent the whole weekend saying, "I can't believe this is true. This could be very well be true. This has got to
Mm.
be true." He was saying all that, and I think that was the moment that kind of directed him for the rest of his life, because the rest of his life he's been doing parapsychological stuff and trying to prove the reality of the spiritual, and that these things are really true. He's been
So,
doing the same thing.
so in this wave-based reality that you're talking about, you mentioned there are different dimensions. There's different. I mentioned earlier. So there's. Are we talking about a difference of heaven and hell and all these things, or are we talking about a multiverse where there's multiple versions of us going on at the same time in this one area?
Well, let me say that you know what fractals are?
No.
Mandelbrot fractals. It's like
No.
there are these designs that repeat themselves at different levels. You'll get the same repeat, and you'll go up
Okay.
and get the same repeat of these same designs and whatever.
Okay.
It's almost like the universe is a fractal, and that things that we see on one level can be the same thing or very similar things that we see on another level. And
Mhm.
just like um, you would say, you have black holes in the centers of galaxies,
Mhm.
and that's where planets or solar systems could fall in and get squished, and broken down into elemental parts. You have something called the great attractor in superclusters, which is clusters of galaxies that an entire galaxy could fall into. And similarly, I guess if you want to look at a smaller level on Earth, just our process of birth, life, and death is very similar to what you could say would happen with the birth of planets in a nebula to their life to their death in a black hole. So
Hmm.
you can have the same or similar things happening at all these different levels. And I think that's what's going on in the universe. And I wanted to give you an idea, just or a thought, since I had you on this podcast, is scientists say that infinity doesn't exist in nature. And you can have whole number infinity that'll go on and on and on, and you'll have fractional infinity that you keep adding numbers to the end of the fraction, and it'll just keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. But scientists have said while you can show its existence mathematically, and many times you can prove that or show that things that exist mathematically exist in nature, they say infinity can't exist in nature because there's a law of the conservation of mass and energy where they say that, or mass and energy, and they say that in a closed universe, you can't create more matter or more energy or take it away. You can transmute it. You can transition it between matter and energy or energy and matter, but you can't create more of it or destroy it. And that's why they don't, say that infinity doesn't exist in three dimensions. But in four dimensions, this is where I think that our universe really is. It's sitting in four spatial dimensions, and I'll give you an example for that. Is we talked about a square being a two-dimensional object, a cube is a three-dimensional object. Have you ever heard of a tesseract, which is a fourth dimensional cube?
Yeah, isn't that what they used wasn't a Tesseract in one of those
It
Marvel
was in
movies?
Interstellar, I believe.
Interstellar. No, there
Yeah,
was what was the Tesseract thing? I'm gonna
and
Google
there's a
that.
rock group called Tesseract too, I think. But what it is it's a cube within a cube, and the cubes can move between each other, get smaller and bigger, bigger and smaller. But the fourth dimension is the first dimension where things can loop. And what I said in my book is that I think that infinity exists in the fourth dimension, and that whole number infinity loops with fractional infinity.
So
And
Tesseracts were actually used in Iron Man. Anyway, go
Iron
ahead.
Man, there you go. Okay, all right, all right, all right.
Yeah.
So but I was going to say infinity can loop in the fourth dimension,
Hmm.
and you've seen the images of a snake eating its tail, the cosmic Ouroboros.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
I think that's what people were trying to say thousands of years ago. Were trying to convey is that there's these big loops in our dimensions, and you could say, well, if infinity exists in the fourth dimension, and that whole number infinity and fractional infinity are really loops, where can you see that in nature? And you have black holes in the center of galaxies, and I said, in superclusters and things, where large entities, like planets or solar systems or galaxies can go into them and get broken apart. And there's a theoretical white hole that they say that's where the matter comes back out. And it starts as cosmic rays or protons or just subatomic particles that end up growing back into the planets and the solar systems and the galaxies again. But it's a looping of that stuff. So you say, well, if planets can go into a black hole, where's a white hole? We've theoretically talked about it, but they don't know what it is. And I proposed in the book that we've been studying it for years, and it's the Big Bang. The Big Bang
Hmm.
was the emergence of matter from a white hole.
Hmm. Interesting. But Mark Hunter Brooks, I wanna know, is there another version of me in some dimension that has a completely different life?
There's um, multiple spirits of you having different experiences all at the same time.
Really?
And let's just use Earth as an example. In this timeline, if you look from a fourth, and again, let me say this is my model, my theory, whatever. It's a straw man to have discussions for people to do experiments on. I don't want to say I have the definitive answer. but I'll
Hmm.
give you an idea about talking about time. Is that time in three dimensions is a time stream, and people talk about all time existing at the same time. Have
Hmm.
you ever heard that?
No, I don't think I have.
Okay, well, there's people that would say that all time exists simultaneously,
Okay.
and that it's really just a continuum, and
Hmm.
you can plop down in any part of that time stream and live your life.
Hmm.
But you don't have to live your lives serially. Like have one life in the 1500s, one life in the 1600s, and the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, and 2000s. And especially now with all this stuff going on, I think you can have multiple instances of yourself existing at the same time. So you can have, your previous incarnation or previous existence being born in 1980, your current existence being born in 1992, your future existence is being born in 2000, and three or four others all clustered in there at the same point. And they could be part of your family, you know, brother, sister, husband, wife, mother, father, grandfather, grandmother, aunt, uncle. You could have all those people being different incarnations or different instances of you because all time is existing at the same point. So you can have
So you,
multiple instances of you here, but it's you in your spirit, not you in your personality of this body that you're in the lifetime you're living.
so you're saying that me and my mother and my father are all the same person?
They could be. They
You,
But not the same person, the same conscious entity
so you,
that has a different personality, that's coming in having a different lifetime, that's working on different aspects of their eternal self.
so we're all
So
the same consciousness, just different versions of it.
different versions of it.
Wow,
Yeah,
that is mind bending.
cool.
I've never heard that. That like, so I because I
So
you're saying that one consciousness could be a whole bunch of people plopped down around the same time. Like there's another version of my consciousness bouncing around out there somewhere.
of your higher level consciousness, but you're not aware of it. Is
Yeah, I
that
guess
you're
so when
but
I
it's each lifetime is working on different aspects of your eternal being. So one
wow.
lifetime could be working on your relationships. One time could be working on your intellectual knowledge and control of your emotions or control of your ego. You could have different lifetimes that are working on different aspects of your eternal self, and they could all exist at the same point in time and even help each other out. Like if you had a hard time in your life and somebody just kind of swooped in and saved your tail,
Mhm.
and got you back on your feet, that could very well have been another instance of you,
Huh.
but
Wow.
as a female or as an older person or a younger person or whatever.
Hmm.
So you don't know.
So how does that is this something that you've come up with on, like, is this your own theory, or are there other people who subscribe to this same idea?
um, this is what I developed over years of trying to figure out what happened to me and trying to make sense of it in an internally consistent way. And
Happened to you? Like, what do you mean happened to
with
you?
all the spiritual experiences that I've had.
Do you
This
think that
this
some
is
of these are
this
your consciousness coming back to you, kind of thing?
No, I'm trying to say that I've wrestled with trying to explain what happened to me, and the way that I've explained it is that reality is different than what people believe, that it's fully wave based instead of particle
Int-
based or quantum based. But
Interesting.
there's other people that have also proposed a fully wave based reality. I want to say Erwin Schrodinger, who was a Nobel laureate, Einstein to a
Hmm.
degree did, Ernst Mach did, who did the Mach
Hmm.
number, or is named after him.
Hmm.
Um, there's a fellow that actually the guy that initially proposed the neutron decay experiment. He was a PhD in optics, I believe, is Milo Wolf. He wrote a book called Schrodinger's Universe, and the whole book is about a fully wave based reality, and he actually proposes a theory of everything in Schrodinger's universe that he said aligns with natural law, aligns with physics, and quantum physicists, experimental physicists, have been wrestling with a theory of everything for almost a century, trying to figure it out. But
Hmm.
Milo Wolf said with a wave-based premise, fully wave-based reality premise, he could define a theory of everything with three statements.
What are those statements?
Well, I outline them in my book, but it's in his
Hmm.
book, Schrodinger's Universe. But
Hmm.
I outlined them here mostly to say that it exists, because I didn't think people realized that it existed. But
Hmm.
I'll give you, you can see that he has some differential equations right there. But
Wow.
it's figure 35 in my book
Wow.
on page 120. But
S-
get Schrodinger's Universe by Milo Wolf, and
Hmm.
he actually goes into the mathematics of wave based physics. He does that. He proposed the neutron decay experiment on page 108 of his book,
Hmm.
and he did a lot of work on it, a lot of mathematical work on it.
So when you present this to people, like say, I know you talked about you going to different convection conventions and
Yeah,
different things. When you present this to people, how is it received?
people are. It's mixed. You know,
Uh-huh.
I think I'm getting more traction now because more
Okay.
people are interested in the spiritual and the metaphysical, and people are struggling with the physics now. I also want to say, since you're out in California, I hope that there's some people listening, who are at Stanford or Caltech. I
Hmm.
really would like to say to them, I said, consider that quantum mechanics and all the struggles they have with it, they get the right answers, but the mathematics is so complex that people are really struggling with it. And Richard Feynman, who was one of the physics professors at Caltech, he would say if you or if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand it. It was, and he was. There's some other thing that somebody said, just shut up and compute. This says you'll get the right answer, just don't question it or whatever. So anyway, that wasn't attributed to any of those guys. But
Hmm.
what I wanted to say is to, if you're thinking about quantum mechanics, think about it and some of the problems that they have with the mathematics of it as being a 21st century form of geocentrism, where in the 1600s people thought that the planets circled the Earth instead of the sun,
Hmm.
and they got the right answers when they would do the mathematics, but everything looked like a spirograph, with all these little curlicues of orbits around the Earth. But when you changed the center of the solar system to be the sun instead of the Earth, everything went into these really nice and simple circles. And I wanted to propose to people, consider that the same thing is happening with quantum mechanics, is that it's a 21st century form of geocentrism, and that if you, instead of having quantum mechanics as the core, have a fully wave-based reality as the core, try that for a few weeks, in your modeling and in your experiments and in your thinking, to see if that might be a more simplistic way of thinking about reality. Because I
Hmm.
know people have struggled for decades to try and agree on the different versions of quantum mechanics, which one's correct, and they haven't been able to do that. It's been a
So
struggle.
so as you develop this and you develop your spiritual abilities, do you think that it's possible to shift into other dimensions in your consciousness?
Yes.
Have you ever done that?
Um, yes.
Like which one?
I took courses at a an institute that deals with the expansion of consciousness,
Okay.
and I was able to project my consciousness to the moon and project it to the place where you go when you first die. They call it the park, and it's like a 30,000 acre park with trees and homes and stuff like that. But they say that's where you go when you first die.
Okay, so let's start with the moon. You projected your consciousness to the moon?
Yes.
And what when you got there, I mean, were you like could you see like you got there and you could see and
What
you're like, "Oh, the crap, there's the earth."
let me give you a
And
little
was it
more.
round or was it flat? Let's just
Let me
clear
give
that up.
you a little more context with it.
Okay, okay.
There was a fella named Ego Swan, who was a
Uh-huh.
famous remote viewer, and he wrote a book where he talked about doing a CIA project where he
Hmm.
was asked to do remote viewing on the far side of the moon.
Hmm.
and he was saying there was alien installations and stuff there. So
Hmm.
I was playing around in one of these courses. I had a free session, to go do anything I wanted to, and so I said, well, I'll project my consciousness to the moon, and I laid back and did it, and I could see the moon as being real small and getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then a crater becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, and then the next thing I knew, I was sitting in a hallway with ambient lighting and a number of doors on either side, and that's how I ended up there. So, and the other one was when we were actually doing a session to go to the park. I actually saw it. Um, and saw, and you could have somebody check me on this. There was a house I saw that was sitting out on a precipice, with two lighthouses below it on the cliff. So if somebody's been there, done that, that was something I saw that could say whether I saw it or not.
Okay, wait. Let's go. We'll go back. We'll come back to that, but let's go to the moon thing. So when you say you went to like you saw the moon coming, you saw a crater coming, and the next thing you know you're in a hallway with a bunch of doors.
Right.
You thought you were on, your consciousness was on the
In
moon at that
in
point?
in a facility, I think, in a facility on the moon.
Okay. What kind like it are there facilities on the moon?
Well, that's what Ingo Swann said in his book, and I was just trying to see if it was true or not.
So you but he said that he thought there were alien life on the moon.
Mhm.
And so you projected your consciousness there and you think you found alien life on the moon?
Or I think my consciousness ended up in a hallway, in a facility. And all these things I'm telling you, I haven't told anybody before. So this
Well,
you're getting a
this is
lot
an
of good stuff
exclusive.
out
I'm
of
getting
me.
the Edlow podcast
You
exclusive
you
from
you are
Mark Hunter
you're
Brooks.
getting a lot out of me.
This is interesting because I how does one
And I
project?
was
Go
going to
ahead.
say, and I want to talk about this more. So this is okay.
Okay, good. I'm glad. But how does one project your consciousness that far?
That that's some of the things that you can do, like with remote viewing.
Hmm.
There's actually an organization that teaches remote viewing. It's called IRVA. It's
Hmm.
irva.org, the International Remote Viewing Association.
And
Uh,
that's what this is called, remote viewing. When you do this.
it's a form of it, but it's like also a form of out of body experience too. Is that you can go out of body to a particular location, or you can project your consciousness to a particular location, or you can that's more subtle is you can sense. Um, I don't know how to put it. You can sense the uh, feelings of things that are going on there. It's more of an intuitive kind of function. But there's
Interesting.
and it's kind of like yin and yang. There's the forceful way of doing it, and there's a subtle way of doing it.
Hmm.
But and I'm trying to make all these things, and I wrote in my little thing, my little blurb about myself, is I'm trying to make the mystical and the paranormal easier to understand, and
Yeah.
trying to make it more understandable for people who don't understand it. So
So so
this is
so
good.
so now that you've seen that you've projected your consciousness to the moon, I mean, we've never heard anybody say that there was alien life on the moon. Did that change? Like, did you do you think that there is now that you've done that?
All I can say is what I saw, but I didn't
Yeah.
see any alien creatures there.
Oh, okay. Okay. Now the park. I've never heard of the park. So is that kind of like a purgatory?
It's also called Focus 27, and it's a particular place that you can go if you take courses at one of these uh, organizations.
No. Okay. Wait. Hold on. I thought you
There
Focus 27
there's
is where you
places
go when you
that
die.
there's places, yeah, that's
Oh,
where
okay.
people go when they first die, but they go different. My understanding of it is they go different places after that, but you get a particular place initially that you land in, sitting on a park bench, and somebody comes up and says, "Hey, you're dead. What do you want to do? Where do you want to go?" Da 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 da. That's a very high level thing, but the whole idea is not to just scare you, to put you in a um, whole different situation. Now, I will say there's another thing too. If people are interested in this, There's a I don't know how to describe it. It's like a group of people who have very high level abilities, and some of them do things that the name of it is called invisible helpers.
Hmm.
And there's a book by Charles Leadbeater or C.W. Leadbeater. It's about 100 years old, where he talks about it. It's titled Invisible Helpers. But I don't know if you know people, or if people on the podcast have heard people say, well, like, I was at a really low point in my life, and I was thinking about doing this or thinking about doing that. And then all of a sudden somebody came up and talked to me, and we talked for a couple hours, and they convinced me not to do this or not to do that. And I turned around to look at something, and when I turned back, they were gone. Or
Hmm.
someone who was in a dangerous situation and maybe a fire in their house, and somebody came in and helped them get out of the fire or avoid, the dangers and stuff, and then they disappeared.
Hmm.
That that that's actually, or could be, people who are living on the planet now, who are helping folks, either consciously or unconsciously while they're sleeping. Their consciousness is helping people do things at night. And there was a guy who wrote a book called The Night Bell, and he was talking about soldiers in World War II and World War One, and he was saying that the amount of people who died, on one particular day was so much that it strained the invisible helper force worldwide. People who were getting knocked out of their bodies so fast, and being in this fearful, scared fit, going up into the afterlife, that it strained the invisible helper force that tried to escort people who didn't know how to get to the afterlife up there, or who were knocked out of their bodies while they were still, in the prime of their life and not at the end of their life,
Wow.
which is, yeah. So that was an interesting book.
So
And
this.
most people who are skeptics and stuff, and people who
Mhm.
aren't really into this, they don't know about all these books, but
Right.
they're there. And I want to say that for people who are interested in it, they can find it, and for people who work on it, they can find new things that will, and people who would help them, at different points along their path, that they're serious about trying to develop their consciousness or develop their spirituality. And and I want to say it aligns with a lot of what um, world religions teach and what Scripture teaches and stuff. That's what I'm trying to explain, in my books,
Hmm.
and in the way I'm talking to people, is to say that science, religion, and the paranormal, they're all part of the same worldview. Trying to roll
That's,
that back to that again.
yeah. So I want to go back real quick to this. So since you've learned how to project your consciousness, has there been anybody like you said you went to an institute to learn how to do this,
Right.
right? Okay. So has there been, do you know how far the farthest someone has been able to do that would be?
People have gone throughout the solar system.
Really?
Yes.
I mean,
And
I'm just
in,
curious.
in,
Is
in books that they've written. Here, hold on. I can read you some stuff from my book. Not trying to sell my book, of course.
yeah.
Shameless plug.
No.
Um, there was a couple quotes that, I mean, even back to the 1600s, there's people that have talked about this, and most of them don't get the traction or the exposure with what they say. Um, Wait a minute. Okay, so this is from Robert Monroe's book Ultimate Journey, and Robert Monroe was an out of body explorer and an author. And he said, if there are intelligent beings in the physical universe, we failed to find them. And he was doing out of body exploration. In the
Mm.
non physical universe, it was an entirely different matter. We encountered hundreds, if not thousands, most of them non human.
Wow.
Uh, Charles
Interesting.
Charles Leadbeater in the astral plane on pages 29 to 106, when he talks about inhabitants of the astral, he said, We must now attempt to fill in the figures to describe the inhabitants on the astral plane. The immense variety of these entities makes it exceedingly difficult to arrange and tabulate them. Perhaps the most convenient method will be to divide them into three great classes: the human, the non-human, and the artificial.
Hmm.
And then Leadbeater talked about this saint, or about entities on the mental plane as well. And he said, in our endeavor to describe the inhabitants of the mental plane, it will perhaps be well for us to divide them on the same three great classes chosen for the in the manual on the astral plane: the human, the non-human, and the artificial. Through the subdivision, though the subdivisions will naturally be less numerous in this case than in that, since the products of man's evil passions, which bulk so largely there, can find no place here in the mental. And
Wow.
then Emanuel Swedenborg, who was a philosopher and an out-of-body traveler who lived between 1745 or in the 1700s, let me put it that way. He wrote about his spiritual experiences between 1745 and 1765, and he wrote 4 volumes of books about them. And he said, in general, it must be maintained that all things I've written in this book have not been written in any other way than from actual experience, from conversation with spirits and angels, from thought communicated as tacit speech, for I have in every case perceived their presence.
Wow. So, have you, in your work and your spiritual experiences, had conversations with angels?
That's a good question. Um, Thoughts and emphasis on focused on particular objects and things, sometimes some telepathic speech over the years, but not like me sitting and standing in front of an angelic being.
Hmm.
But you need to ask the question, what do you define as an angelic being? Anybody non-physical, an angel with wings and a harp, or you know what would you call that? Because if you say anything non-physical as an angel, and you can look at it that way, then there would be much more of a possibility of communications with them.
Yeah, I think what I view as an angel would be something like, for example, Mary and Joseph getting an angel coming and saying, "Hey, by the way, Mary, that Immaculate Conception thing's legit. She's not just making that up."
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
something like that, or the angel Gabriel coming to the shepherds and saying, "Hey, Savior's been born. You might
Right.
want to go check it out."
and
So,
and you can say the appearance and disappearance of those beings is on a wave-based reality. It's them coming into that frequency and moving out of that frequency.
mhm,
They
interesting.
didn't they didn't change, they didn't fly away or whatever. They just disappeared because they changed the frequency of their body.
So here's a question for you. Being that you are Southern Baptist, and I have to ask this because of my
And
Mormon
and
upbringing.
Church of Christ. I grew up
Yeah,
Southern
yeah,
Baptist. I've been going to
right.
a Church of Christ. They're Southern Baptists who sing a cappella,
Okay,
for people
okay.
who don't know.
Got it. Well, let me ask you, because I noticed when I was in Indiana that there were a lot of Baptists and Pentecostals who
Right.
were not super excited about Mormon missionaries. So I don't know how much you know about the Mormon story of Joseph Smith and his visions of God and the Book of Mormon and the angel Moroni.
Mhm.
So based on this wavelength thing, would you say that that's certainly possible, that that could have all happened?
Certainly possible. I've reviewed some of the videos on it, kind of warming
Okay.
up for this podcast, but
Hmm.
certainly possible.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus could appear in North America. You could have
Hmm.
had, all sorts of different groups that could come. You could have angels appear and disappear. I
Hmm.
would say yes.
Yeah, because in there's a book called Joseph Smith History, which is part of our canon,
Uh-huh.
and he tells the story about the angel Moroni appearing to him and telling him,
Right.
coming to his room 3 times to tell him about the
Right.
Book of Mormon, and then it talks about how he disappeared up into a conduit up into his room, and I'm like, that sounds very mystical. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, and which makes sense because at the time, back in the 1820s, when he was 1820s and 30s, I mean, there was a
Hmm.
lot of mysticism going on in upper state
Hmm.
New York, so that would make sense
Hmm.
to describe it that way.
Yeah.
But
But
that
but
all
I
makes sense compared to what you're doing too.
I would say it's wave based physics. Appearance and
Hmm.
disappearance, just frequency in, frequency out.
Hmm.
And and also too, this is another thing too. You can ask about, how did the pyramids get built?
Hmm.
And one of the things that I like to say when you talk about mass, what is mass in
Hmm.
physical objects? There was one scientist who said something that I really liked, and he said that um, think about mass in terms of angular momentum, like the wheels turning on a bicycle is what keeps
Hmm.
you upright when you're moving on your bike, or like a gyroscope, that's what keeps it moving in one direction and makes it really hard to turn in any other direction.
Hmm.
Is angular momentum could be what's creating mass in objects. And so if you look at the atomic level, you have three quarks in a proton and three quarks in a neutron, and those quarks spin. So if you can imagine the spinning occurring in three different axes, an x, y, and z axis, that spinning could create the cumulative effect of the spinning of those quarks and the protons and neutrons of atoms that become molecules that become solids or liquids or gases or whatever, could be what's causing the mass that you
Hmm.
find in rocks that make them hard to pick up or objects that make them hard to pick up. But one of the things, if you could say that you could stop the spinning of quarks, if you stop that spin, then whatever mass you have, it becomes massless.
Hmm.
And that could be a way that the Egyptians moved these 20-ton blocks of concrete. Is they were able to stop the spin of the quarks in the granite so that it became weightless and then it became easy to move.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
that was
That's
and that's wave physics. So and I'll give you another one is wave particle duality. That was the double slit experiment, if you've ever heard of that.
hmm.
Is to where if you don't observe photons, that they'll create a wave pattern on a let's say like a digital camera plate, like a back end plate that captures the image through the lenses and stuff. You fire photons at that back of that digital camera plate, and you go through two slits, and you don't observe it, that the photons will form an interference pattern on the target. But if you observe it, they form particles, and people have been confused about that for decades. But
Hmm.
one way you can look at it from a wave-based perspective is think of FM radio. And I don't know if you know the difference between FM radio and AM radio. Is AM radio is really just spiral waves going through the air, but FM radio has a carrier wave going at a particular frequency, and then the actual sound is just the increase or decrease in the density or in the distances between uh, I don't know what they call it, different parts of the waves, the longitudinal waves in FM
Hmm.
radio. But the key part about FM is the carrier wave. So imagine photons are being shot out from the sun to the earth, and that there's multiple dimensions and multiple realities on the earth. If photons don't have a carrier wave, they can hit and be seen in all realities and all dimensions. But if you observe them, you're going to impart that carrier wave on that photon, and that's what will make it appear as a particle. But if you don't have a carrier wave, it can appear at multiple frequencies and it'll appear as a wave. But if you observe it, you're imparting a carrier wave on it at a particular frequency, which make it look like a particle.
Hmm.
Is that is that's an
I,
idea? It,
yeah.
it's it's
Yeah. I
something
don't
if
know.
somebody
I
wants
don't
to do
know.
an experiment on it.
Yeah. I don't know if I follow. I don't know if I'm smart enough. That was the thing that I find so interesting about you too, is that, um, you have, managed several business projects for Fortune 100 companies. You have an MBA from New York University.
Yeah.
I mean, you're a really intelligent guy, and I assume run in intelligent circles. When you talk to business people, like if you had a chance to talk to them about this stuff, what's their reaction?
I took an early retirement from my job in 2015, and that's when
Oh,
my first book came out. So
got it.
I call the book author stuff my swan career, or not swan song career, but my encore career. There we go.
Got it.
But it's a totally different thing for me, totally different
Mhm.
line of business, line of work, but it's more reflective of who I am, I think,
Do
than anything
you
else.
do you ever hear from old colleagues who hear about your work, and do they ever respond and say anything about it? Like,
I haven't been forthcoming with old colleagues about stuff. It's
uh,
mostly I've been talking to uh, people who are more spiritual or more metaphysical because
Yeah.
they more readily understand what I've done.
Are you married? Do you have kids?
Divorced
Okay.
in 2013.
Oh, okay. All
And
right.
I think, and you could look at it from a spiritual standpoint, is that time alone was necessary for me to start writing because I needed the solitude in which to write and do the research and thought. So
Sure.
from a lifetime look or view of it, that was necessary for me to do what I've done. And that if I didn't have that solitude or if I didn't have that separation, I wouldn't have been able to write or even come up with the ideas that I have.
Mhm. Now you're how long were you married?
27 years.
Okay. And do you have kids?
I have a daughter.
Okay. So you were having these spiritual experiences while you were married.
Yes.
Was she was she on board with this? Did she think you were, how did
The
she react?
I think the more I got into it, the more distant we became. And
Mm,
I mentioned this to you before we got on the podcast here, is that there was a study that a professor in North Texas University, I believe, did
mm,
about couples where one partner had had a near death experience and what happened to the marriage. And the result of the study was is that 68% of the marriages ended in divorce.
yeah.
And we had talked about that, but I think it's because the worldviews shifted to such an extent that it was hard to be on the same page anymore.
Yeah.
and
You're
and
you're
and that's why I feel like, and I've seen that happen with people where one partner has had a transformative spiritual experience, or has done something with the spiritual or the metaphysical that the other one hasn't, and
mm,
they hang around for a couple years, and
mhm.
go to the meetings and they attend and speak up in the things, but eventually, I think they end up growing more distant, and it's a very serious struggle that couples have to do or go through when
Mm,
one has this change of worldview.
yeah.
It,
How about your daughter? What does your daughter think about all this?
um, she knows about it, but we don't talk about it.
Mm, hmm. Yeah, I mean, I got to imagine that shifting this way, especially,
and
I
and
can
to
tell,
the degree that I have.
right, and I can tell you that, even just when you're talking to somebody, like when you're just talking about religious experience with
Hmm.
somebody who is not religious,
Hmm.
it's tough.
Yes.
Even if you're not talking about some stuff like as theoretical as you are talking about, if you're just talking about a basic, a religious experience where you feel the spirit of God working in your life
Right.
and describing that to somebody who hasn't experienced it, uh, you really, you're speaking, it's almost like you're speaking a completely different language. They just don't
Correct.
understand it. And
Correct. And
so
I-
I could,
and and I think that's what the rulers said to Paul when he was on his way to Rome. As
mm,
they said, your intelligence has made you crazy, because he was talking about things that they had never heard of and that seemed so
right.
foreign to them. But
Well, what do you hope? Your goal with this is to ultimately change the world's view into a wave-based idea, change physics to a wave-based model.
um, not my well, it's a goal, but not necessarily for me. I think I've gone about as far as I can go with it on my own.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I want to say to all the scientists and all the researchers out there, I'll be happy to share whatever I've done or whatever I know with you to give you information to create the hypotheses and the experiments to try and prove or disprove this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it's at the point now where other people need to run with it. If people believe in it or have a passion for it, I'd love to work with them to try and help. But it's I've kind of run to the end of the road with my research, and I'd really need to tell people more about it now and
Mhm.
show through what I've written, how everything works together and is internally consistent, like I've said before. But to let them go out and actually try and prove it or disprove it, and I think that's
Interesting.
where we are.
Mm.
And
So
and I
I'm,
don't I don't think it'll take 1 or 2 years. I'm thinking, like a couple decades, because
yeah.
it's such a fundamental change. But I did want to bring up that fundamental nature of the change, that it's below the worldview. It's the foundations that support the worldview that are changing. And I spent my years of work in project management in IT, in computer science. And when we had production problems, it always turned out that the longer the problem lasted, the more simple the fix was, because people had assumed something that was one way and it wasn't.
Mm.
And so that's why I want to kind of impart to people is that, people have struggled with so many things, quantum mechanics, with physics and paradigms and things for so long. And it may be that the reason why is because the thing that's not correct is something so fundamental and so below where people are looking, that they need
Mm.
to go back and check the very fundamentals to see if they work or not, see if they're correct or not. So that's one thing I'd
Interesting.
like to leave with people.
Interesting. Well, let me ask you. I ask everybody three questions,
Uh-oh.
and I want to ask them to you. And these are kind of more basic life questions. The first one is, what do you think is your biggest success in life?
I think I haven't had my biggest success yet.
Okay.
I think the one that I'm working on right now with this book and trying to promote this idea is going to be my biggest challenge, biggest opportunity.
Okay. What do you think was your biggest failure in life, and what did you learn from it?
Mm. So when I graduated from college,
Mm.
um, 22 years old, I had been president or vice president of 29 different organizations.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was really big on that. And actually, when I got to Manhattan, I worked in Manhattan for 18 years.
Hmm.
And my first job in Manhattan, I actually prayed to God. I said, "Let me fail.
Hmm.
Let me experience failure." And I didn't realize that I was starting to see or starting to sow the seeds of long work hours and things that Manhattan kind of does with people.
Hmm.
Is sowing the seeds of issues in my marriage.
Hmm.
That would manifest itself about 20 years later. But I had a
Hmm.
2 hour commute each way, to work and back every day. So punching the clock for me was like a 12 or 13-hour day. And I did
Hmm.
that 5 days a week,
Hmm.
and only had, a couple days to be home. And when my daughter was little, I would leave before she woke up and came home after she went back to bed.
Hmm.
So I didn't have a lot of time there. And when I moved to the city that I'm in now, one of the big reasons was to give me more time to spend with the family,
Hmm.
and that's
Hmm.
what I wanted to do. So, but that was one of the big struggles for me. I think that was probably the biggest. But
Yeah.
also it was to a degree too. It was arrogance and pridefulness, you
Hmm.
know, and saying that I'd been so successful and stuff, and I think I needed to be knocked down from that. And that was another thing too that I feel like I've gotten through or gotten by.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. As an attorney myself, long hours are just part of the gig.
Hmm.
Luckily, it's funny. I've told the story that it took me because I had to work all the way through. So it took me about 5 years to get through undergrad, working full time,
Hmm.
and then I did a 4 year law school program in the evening and worked full time. Where
Yeah,
I'm at now, I'm now a partner at the firm that I started law clerking at, and
yeah,
so it took me 9 years just to get to the starting line of the 60 to 70 hour weeks, and it does take a toll, you know. It really does, and I'm lucky now that I've gotten to a place where I still work the long hours. Don't get me wrong, but
yeah.
my four kids are 16, 14, 12, and 10, and I'm realizing how little time we really have
Right.
with them.
And also too, one thing that uh, I always encourage younger people to talk to older people,
Hmm.
because there's consequences of decisions that take 10 or 20 years to manifest themselves. And you can't see that as a 20-year-old or a 25-year-old just starting your life. But
Hmm.
some of the things you decide to do or choose not to do can have an impact in your 30s or 40s or 50s later
God,
on in your life.
isn't that true? It's
And
so true. I
it's
talk I,
important to have those conversations with people.
I talk about that particularly in the time interest of money with my kids when I talk to them about finances, and I go, man, I was lucky enough to pick up a book called Automatic Millionaire when I was 23 years old. That
Hmm.
just it didn't teach you anything novel other than just here's debt. Here's what that does. Here's the
Right.
compound interest of money. Here's why you would put a 401k. If you put $5 a day into this thing, this is how much money you'd have. Just little things like that where I went, wow. And I was like, I wish I would have started when I was 18. You know what I
Right.
mean? Just
Right.
because the time interest and I think there's a lot of things like that. The more you invest into things that are eternal,
Right.
the better off you'll be. So,
Right. And that's what I'm doing right now. I'm
mm,
investing in the eternal. So
mhm,
I've been lucky to be able to do things I was passionate about my whole life.
mhm,
Before I was in project management, I was in network management,
mhm.
and I actually put in the second token ring network in Manhattan
Oh wow.
right when it was introduced. But I built, big Ethernet networks. I built wide area networks, managed business networks, and then got into project management with Y2K
Mm,
and did project management at this company for 15 odd years. But I've been passionate about all those, and I think that's essential for people. You need to be passionate about what you do, even if it's shoeing horses.
mm.
If you have a passion for doing that, do that. You don't have to worry about the cash. And I think a lot of people, when they get older, they realize, and a lot of times I tell people, you have to have it to know you don't need it. You have to
Oh
have celebrity to know you don't need celebrity. You have to have money to know that you don't need money.
yeah,
And
it's
it comes back to just the very basics of family, friends, and being comfortable in your life. But you don't have to have a lot to be comfortable.
it's funny, you bring that up. Um, I remember when I was a kid because my parents are still together. They're great. They're doing good. My dad's amazing now, but he struggled. He had a pretty rough childhood and ended up with a bit of a drug problem that took
Yeah.
him a long time to get rid of. And um, so when I grew up, uh, I thought, I think in the back of my head, I don't think I ever verbalized it, but I think I always thought all my parents ever fought about was either drugs or money.
Mm-hmm.
Like they fought about it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just thought to myself, well, if I just don't do drugs and I have all the money, then things will be fine.
Yeah.
And then I became, I was successful way faster than I ever could have imagined. I mean,
Right.
like, I always thought I was going to be successful, but I did not expect what happened as quickly as what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it did, I remember looking around and being like, you know, uh, oh, you mean it wasn't the big house? Maybe it's the nice car. Oh, it's not the nice
Mm-hmm.
car. Maybe it's the pinball
Mm-hmm.
machine. Maybe I'll build a movie theater in my house.
Right.
And then I just realized, no, none of. I mean, it took some pretty significant life events that I don't really share a lot about for me to finally realize, no, what really matters is the people around you, the people you love,
Absolutely.
and what really matters is spending the time with them. And I don't regret anything I did because I have an amazing life now. But um, in where my life is going is so much better than I could have ever imagined, and it took a lot of things, a lot of bad things to get there.
Mm-hmm.
But but yeah, I think that you're like you said earlier, it takes you getting everything you thought you wanted to realize
That you
you
don't
didn't
need
need
it.
any of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, last question I ask everybody, and that is eventually at some point in your life, you're going to pass away and you're going to move on to that metaphysical plane.
Right.
And there's going to be there's going to be a funeral and someone's going to give a eulogy. What would be the one thing that you hope someone says about you in your eulogy?
He did what he loved throughout his life.
Yeah. That is so important, isn't it?
It is.
Like
And
it's
I didn't plan it that way. It's just the way things happened. But
yeah.
I'm thankful for that. But work was never work for me. It was always play.
See, that's awesome. That's why you could work those 12 and 13-hour days because you were having fun.
I was having a ball. I literally was having a ball, and they were
Yeah.
paying me for it.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, Mr. Brooks, thank you very much. So again, tell us Earth's Hidden Reality. Where can we find it?
You can find it on Amazon, and it's under Mark Hunter Brooks, and you can see digital copies of my first three books as well. You may see an ebook up there in a little while, and I'm hoping to work on a fifth printed book that would get more into biology and psychology on a wave based reality.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. For those who've made it the almost 2 hours we've been talking, subscribe, subscribe. We're coming up. We are actually coming up. Well, I don't know when I'm going to be dropping this one. So we're right at about a year this podcast has been going on, and I've got some things in the works for next year, and also working on a pretty cool 1 year anniversary episode. So we got a lot of fun stuff coming up. So keep watching, keep subscribing, following wherever you hear podcasts. And Mr. Brooks, when your next book comes out, let me know and we'll have you back.
Oh, I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.